Hello class, welcome to the 1 week lecture. This week we will be introducing the criminal justice system. It's going to be 1 second and get this PowerPoint going for you guys. So with every lecture, you guys are going to have objectives, and the purpose of objectives is that at the end of every lecture you should be able to do what the objectives say. If that is not the case, then you need to go back or read in depth in the book with the objective described. So for example, I typically won't do this, read them all, but I'll do it because it's the first one. Identify the major stages of the criminal justice system, explain the importance of discretion and ethics in the criminal justice system, describe the different tiers of the wedding cake model, compare and contrast the crime control model with the due process model, and assess the media, how the media can impact the criminal justice system. So if by the end of this lecture you are not able to identify the 3 stages of the criminal justice system or describe the different tiers within the wedding cake model, then you have not completed the objectives, and you need to either review this video, go over your notes, or read from the text, or simply I want you guys to be taking notes and ask me during class so I could clarify anything that you do not understand. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the actual criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system is made up of 3 components. It's policing or law enforcement, and that is, the day-to-day, what you usually see on the street, the marked vehicles. In our case, it's usually Miami-Dade Police. The courts, where trials happen, and corrections, when you're punished, where you get sent for your punishment. And we're going to go a little bit more into depth in a second on these 3. So the relationship that these components have are all interlinked, and the decision that one stage or one group makes ultimately affects the other, right? So for example, law enforcement, they get to a crime scene, they determine that there's enough probable cause to make an arrest, they make an arrest, and this affects corrections. Why? Because somebody has to be put in jail or be held in jail, right, before their trial, right? And let's say that once they go to trial, they are deemed guilty. So let's say it was a felony and it was for something pretty serious, then what happens in the trial in the courts will affect the correctional system again, because that individual might be sent to prison, for example, right? So it's all like a big snowball effect of how these 3 stages are interlinked. So each group makes decisions that ultimately impact the other, so keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and get started with policing or law enforcement. As you see here, we have a City of Miami Police Department officer, right? And these individuals are the first point in contact when investigating a crime with individuals, right? The example that we have here is, when a police officer is responding to a domestic violence dispute, the officer will take statements from both the individuals to determine the defendant and the victim, okay? The courts are responsible for determining whether, the defendant, the person being accused of the crime, is responsible for committing that crime, and they will determine whether they should be held criminally responsible. So the police officers will gather the information, right, and they'll take statements, they'll do an actual police report, the paperwork the police officers don't like, and they'll send it to what's called a district attorney. The district attorney works for the government. So it could be a U.S. attorney, if it's for the federal government, a state attorney, if it's for the state government. And that district attorney will take all the evidence that was gathered by the police and use it in the trial to charge the offender or the alleged offender. Because remember, everybody is presumed innocent until otherwise proven guilty in the court of law. And then lastly, we have corrections, and these institutions are the places where punishments are carried out, and these are the punishments that are ordered by the court. So when an offender is sentenced to a period of incarceration, they could either serve in a jail or a prison, or they could get some other type of alternate sentencing, right, like probation, which we will discuss later on, maybe community service hours. All right, so we'll get more into detail on all these 3 branches or stages of the criminal justice system as the course progresses. So something that's very important within the criminal justice system is discretion. Right? So this is a key word that you will need to know. It refers to the freedom to make decisions, right? So Here in the PowerPoint, when it says criminal justice agents, think of law enforcement, right? Are they always going to want to make an arrest? Are they going to cut someone a break, right? So there's a lot of laws and policies that will guide the discretion of actual criminal justice practitioner. But oftentimes, and I'll give the example of police officers, they will do not necessarily what they want, but what they think is right? Ethically, morally, etc., right? So they could pull somebody going over the speed limit, and they might not, they could write up the ticket, but they might not write the ticket because it was their choice, their discretion to just give the person a warning, all right? We could discuss other instances where police officers might use discretion in class, or if you guys have any questions. Obviously, it carries on from more than just traffic stops. Then another key word that you will need to know is ethics. Ethics within the criminal justice system, right? It's for the criminal justice practitioners to have an understanding of what is, the difference between good and bad behavior. And this is something that criminal justice practitioners do face all the time on their job, some more than others. But this will help decide decision making. And when I think of ethics, I think of the movie American Gangster, if any of you have seen it. I'm sure you could YouTube this scene, and it's a scene in which Russell Crowe, he's a detective in the film. He seizes a vehicle with $1 million in cash, or close to $1 million in cash. And he doesn't keep any of the money. Before all the other police officers and backup arrives, he could have taken all the money, and he gets made fun of. Again, this is a movie, I don't know, and it is depicting, something that happened in real life, but I don't know if this is how it really, happened. But in this case, it portrays Russell Crowe, his character, as being an ethical police officer and detective, because during that time in New York City, officers were expected that when they were making a seizure of that magnitude, that they would take a little bit of a cut for themselves. So these are things that will happen, right? So think of a police officer when they make a seizure, or a detective. It could be a special agent for the DA or the FBI. Are they going to take some of the merchandise? By merchandise, I mean like an illegal product, like if there's 100 kilograms of cocaine, are they going to take one for themselves and sell it themselves on the street? Or if they make a seizure of cash, what are they going to do with it? All right, and ethics also comes with not abusing power, right? So is it ethical for a police officer to speed on his way home, because he's tired, just because he's a police officer, right? Most people will get pulled over, others won't. Is it ethical for a police officer to take free coffee when they go to La Carreta? All right, that's something we could discuss in class. Next up, we have the wedding cake model. Now, the wedding cake model, as you see, it has 4 levels, right, on this cake. And celebrated cases are the cases that we hear about in the media, right, the ones that are in the limelight. And these make up the smallest amount of cases that we see. Then we have the serious felonies, the less serious felonies, and the misdemeanors. Now, before I continue, you guys should know the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. So, for a misdemeanor, this is a crime that you're going to, it's a less serious crime, and it's typically going to be handled by the criminal justice system, but it makes up the majority of the cases that go through, and your punishment is going to be typically less than 1 year, whereas a felony is going to be more serious than a misdemeanor, but your punishment's usually going to be more than 1 year in prison and all the way up to life without, the possibility of parole or even the death penalty. So a misdemeanor could be, like I said, any crime that's less than punishable to a year. So, burglary. Burglary is going to be a felony, right? Breaking in, to a building or anywhere with the intent to take something. But let's say you have petty theft, right? Taking something of small value from a department store. That's going to be a misdemeanor. Now, obviously, as something goes up in value, then it might, become a felony. Now, when we talk about the celebrated cases, we have, a lot of cases out in the media. When I was growing up, the celebrated case was O.J. Simpson. All right, so I can't think of more, um, give me one second.